Love this. Thank y'all. Thank y'all so much for joining us today. So we are going to go ahead and get started, wanting to be mindful and respectful of your times. So good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us here at SACAC Conference virtually. I know that we all have a lot of things going on as we support our students for May 1st, in addition to the civil unrest that is taking place across our country. That said, I know that many of you all are carrying a lot in your head and in your hearts, and we just appreciate you showing up today. So as we prepare to dive in, we want to start with introductions. My name is Dr. Erin Almond, and I currently serve as the director of the KIPP through College program with KIPP Public Schools, Jacksonville. I got my start in education as one of the very first admissions counselors at Georgia Gwinnett College back in 2007. It's when they were switching over from being Georgia Perimeter and just becoming a four-year institution for the first time. And so that was a really exciting time to work in admissions. Since then, I have served as a classroom teacher, a financial aid counselor, and a college counselor prior to moving to Jacksonville and building our KIPP through College program. And I will pass it over to Mr. Glover.
So this is Mr. Williams, who's also with Mr. Glover and Dr. Almond. He's having some audio issues, Dan, in the background. But I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Rashid Williams. And I'm the manager of postsecondary outcomes here for the KIPP through College program. This is my 11th year in education. Started out at the secondary level as a history teacher, working with 7th and 8th grade students. From there, moved on to the KIPP school in Charlotte and became the associate director of their KIPP through College program. Left that position, became the dean of students for another charter network of all boys schools, and then returned to the KIPP network here in Jacksonville as the manager of post-secondary outcomes. So welcome you all.
And while Mr. Glover is having some technical difficulties, you can see his information on the screen. He serves as the manager of college placement for the KIPP through College program. He got his start in education in higher ed, working at Edward Waters College, and he has served there for 6 years before coming over to join us at KIPP Jacksonville. And he currently supports our 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students, making sure that they are able to have a strong transition through high school and then managing our post-secondary process. I'm sorry, y'all. I think we are having some technical difficulties. Were you all able to hear Mr. Williams just now? No, okay. All right, so, right. Got it, I see that in the chat. So Um,
Can you hear me now, Erin?
Yep, that is perfect.
All right. All right. Can you hear me without the echo now, Erin?
Yes.
Awesome.
No.
All right. How about now? I'm sorry.
Perfect.
All right.
Yes, they are in the same room. That is probably what is causing such significant feedback, but it did not do this in our test run. We apologize, y'all, for the technical difficulties that we're having. Thank you so much for your patience.
This is Dan real quick. If they're in the same room, one will have to definitely turn off their microphone. Otherwise, they will be echoing.
Gotcha.
Can they try talking now, or they try?
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me? Again, I'm Rick. I apologize for all of the technical difficulties on my end here. My name is Ricky Glover. I'm the manager of college placement for KIPP Public Jacksonville Schools. I've been here, transitioned to KIPP from higher ed. I had got my first start as an admissions counselor. Then I transitioned into a assistant director of admissions. So I'm glad to be a part of the call today. Just to kind of give you some background information about KIPP. KIPP is a national network of free open enrollment college preparatory public schools with a track record of preparing students in underdeserved communities for success in college and in life. There are currently 15,000 KIPP alumni in college. KIPP was founded in Houston, Texas in 1994 with the goal of transforming the lives of students in under-resourced communities. We proudly come to you from KIPP Public Jacksonville Schools, which was established in 2010 with one middle school. We currently have 3 schools that serve about 16,000 students and 400 alumni. Our student population here is 97% African American and 77% are eligible for free or reduced lunch. Most of our students are or will be first generation students. We currently do not have a high school. So our KIPP through College program serves all 8th grade completers in high school transition and support, post-secondary match, persistence, along with career, ultimately resulting in a 10-year plan for support of all of our students. We spend 4 years with them at the high school level, and then we have a 6-year post-high school plan as well. So the oldest students that we currently serve right now are juniors.
So before we can talk about equity, we wanted to make sure to provide a definition so that we were operating from the same space. And so we love the National Equity Project. It's an amazing resource, and we have referenced their definition of equity. Educational equity means that each child receives what they need to develop to their full academic and social potential. This means ensuring equally high outcomes for all participants in our educational system, removing the predictability of success or failures that currently correlates with any social or cultural factor. This is also interrupting inequitable practices, examining biases, and creating inclusive multicultural school environments for adults and children, and discovering and cultivating the unique gifts, talents, and interests that every human possesses. And so we wanted to use this diagram to kind of show what has to happen in order for educational equity to become a reality. So for this to happen, we must develop leaders, or we must be leaders who can and are willing to transform our institutions by eliminating inequitable practices and cultivating the unique gifts, talents, and interests of every child, so that success and failure are no longer predictable by student identity, whether that is racial, cultural, economic, or any other social factor. So with that said, when we think about equity and the pursuit of educational equity as it relates to college counseling, we believe that it can be simplified to pursuing equity in service and pursuing equity in outcomes.
So we'll start by addressing equity in service. When we think about equity in service, let's start with this question. How equitable are you in your service of students and families in your care? Equity or inequity in service can manifest itself in several ways. It can be time, programming, resource allocation and accessibility, communication, representation, and exposure. Time is the most valuable resource that we have. We should regularly be asking ourselves, how do we spend our time? How much of our time is devoted to counseling students? Are you able to own your schedule, or are you and your team frequently on call for other tasks? When you think about the time spent working with students, which students are you with most? Is it the high flyers? What about the mighty middle? Time with students is one of the most valuable and beneficial things that we have to offer in our counseling. We want to make sure that we're spending it well and equitably. And note, sometimes this means that we may spend less time with certain students. For example, with our program here, we've decided to spend as much time supporting our students who are attending selective private schools here in Jacksonville, because they have a dedicated college counselor to help support them in the process, compared to our students who are attending our larger public high schools with counselor ratios of upwards to 1 to 400 students. We are still engaged with our students attending selective private schools. However, we know that they are receiving a level of support that many of our students on our caseloads are not. And we choose to lean in more with our students in public high schools to help raise the bar for the services that they're able to receive.
So let's also talk about programming. How is your programming designed? What types of programs are you hosting each year? For example, there's a difference between a FAFSA night where you are actively supporting students in completing and submitting the FAFSA, and a financial aid night where you are providing an overview of different types of aid, scholarships, grants, loans, etc. Neither is wrong, and they are both uniquely valuable, but understanding who you serve and their needs helps you to better differentiate your program. So when you look at your programming, who benefits? Who attends your programs? What time do your programs begin? What days of the week are they? What allowances do you make in your programming? For example, we rarely have programs on Wednesday evenings because we know that for many of our families, they have church obligations. When we do have programs, we begin providing dinner, childcare, and after-school support for students because we realize that these were barriers to attendance to our program. After time, resources or money are one of the most valuable things that you have. So how do you use those resources? Our budgets, both personal and professional, indicate our priorities. So when you look at your budget, do you budget for things that promote access and opportunity for your most vulnerable students? And are you connected to resources and programs that will help fill the gaps in your own service or expertise? We don't have to be all things to all people, although it's easy to feel that we should. Sometimes connecting our students to other resources that we have vetted and that we trust can be the best thing that we have to offer them.
And so as we all know, communication matters, right? So the questions we should be considering in the area of communication are, how are we communicating with students and families? And what are we communicating exactly to our students and their families? The thing we need to think about is our language should be intentionally inclusive so that we make sure that we're meeting all of our students and our families from their different backgrounds and the different places they may be located within our city or within our community. For example, a simple way to acknowledge that all students don't live with their parents would be to start to use the word caregivers or guardians when you're speaking about parents. We know some students may be adopted as well. So when we think about that, other questions we should be considering is, what methods of communication are we using to reach our students and families? We should be utilizing multiple methods of communication to reach out and support our students and families, like, emailing them, texting them. Still, snail mail is still in use. We can send them a letter or send them publications through the mail about events that we're having. We can also continue. We know our students, a lot of our students don't even won't accept the call. They'll text before answering the call. And many other platforms that we may use. For example, here in Jacksonville, we use Mongoose Cadence as a way to send out mass texting to our students, and then they can respond and text back with us individually, and we can communicate with them one-on-one. And so we got to be open and flexible to meeting our students where they are. Again, we know some of our students will not reply to us unless we direct message them through social media as well. And so the next thing we want to think about is representation. Representation and exposure for students is huge. And for a lot of us, it's why we do this work. We want to create opportunities for exposure and access for our students. So let's think, who do we allow to have access to our students? Do the same schools or programs come every year when we have workshops that are available to students at our school? Is it only colleges and universities that are allowed to present to students, or is there space for different career programming options to share as well? When you have schools and programs coming to visit, do you determine who gets placed in the cafeteria or library or wherever they're set up for those visits to take place? Who gets to hold more detailed info sessions at your schools during some of these sessions? When you allow schools to host info sessions like colleges or community colleges coming into on your campus, how do you determine which students actually go to those events? And how do you advocate for accessibility within your school? So these are some of the questions that we've had to ask ourselves internally because we've been going through a shift here within the KIPP network as well. As an organization, we started out as focusing on KIPP to college. Then we shifted to KIPP through college. And now we're actually, based on the feedback from alumni and staff members, and even from families, we've shifted to a college, career, and beyond focus, because we realize that, there are more than one way or one path to success. It's not college or bust. And so what we realize is the most important is for our students to be academically prepared to actually choose the best path for them based on their interests and passions, not us dictating to them what we think they should be doing. So let's take a pause for a second, right? Hopefully you guys got your fingers ready to chat with us. All right. When you think about your program, where do you feel the strongest as it relates to equity and service? Is it in the area of time, programming, resource allocation, communication, representation, and exposure? So in the chat, again, go ahead and chat in where you think your program is actually at its strongest as far as providing equity to students and families. All right, thank you, Chelsea. I see time and communication. I see time is one that's coming up more than once. I see programs as well. Thank you, Ann. Time and communication. Wow, that looks like the main two that we're getting here. That's good. So keep them coming. I want to raise this next question for the sake of time, right? So as we think about those areas of strength, obviously we also want to look at areas of growth where we can grow as in our programming as well. So where do you feel that you have the most room for growth as it relates to equity and service? Again, is it in communication? Is it in time? Is it in programming? Is it in the way you allocate your resources for students and families? Is it in the area of representation and exposure? Good, I see, and thank you for that. Representation and exposure. That seems like that's the hit as well with this question. Resource allocation, thank you, Tara. Janice said exposure to career programs. Yes, we were in the same boat, Janice. We had to shift again from college or bus mentality to recognizing that there are career technical education programs right here at our local community college that provides great opportunities for our students, as well as we had to be aware that there were apprenticeships in the area as well that were providing excellent opportunities for our students. I see, Dana, you said exposure. So again, it looks like a common theme with most of you all that exposure and representation were key areas, because we all, again, most of us know that the most successful path is getting a college degree, right, for most of our students, but we know that's not the only path. And I'm so glad that we here in the KIPP network have shifted our focus to, again, to a career and beyond, and not just focusing on college only. So let's pause again for a moment. Let's reflect. When you think about your program, like, where do you feel like you could literally like push you and your teammates to another place to actually go and take your program to a higher level with your students and your families? And so we're going to open up for some Q&A here. I know Erin wants to shift from the slides in a minute, but before she does that, our next slide actually lists the information about how you all can follow us and how you can contact us to continue this conversation. But we do want to open up for Q&A, and so I'm gonna hand it back to Dr. Almond.
Thank you. Q&A is open, but we want to look at one other section before we get there, and that is our equity and outcomes.
Okay, let's talk about our equity and outcomes. It's hard to talk about outcomes because in some ways we know that there are things with our students that are beyond our control. At the same time, we do believe that if we are more equitable in our service, we are more equitable in our outcomes. With that being said, when we look at our outcomes, we have to ask ourselves if our outcomes demonstrate equity. We believe this is done best by examining how we measure our success and how well we honor choice. When you measure your success, what does success look like for your program? A better question might be, what are the metrics of which you're held accountable? Is it acceptance or enrollment in a 4-year institution, or acceptance or enrollment into a 2-year institution? What happens when students want to enlist in the military, for example? Perhaps, let's say, some of our students decide to want, instead of going into the military academies, they decide to enlist. For students who are experiencing this success, what does that mean for you? If they decide to choose to go right in and enlist into the military versus going to our academies, what does that look like? And so when we take that example, I just want to basically pose 2 questions to the group, and you can just put your answers in the chat. Do you know or understand why? But then also, that's one question. How do you plan to address the gaps that you're seeing when it comes to those equitable outcomes?
So voicing over Mr. Glover's question again, when you look at your programs and you see that there are students who aren't experiencing success, you can just enter this in the chat. Do you know or understand why? And how do you plan to address the gaps? So seeing some comments, our first gen students don't get exposure. It's been hard. It has been so hard in the pandemic. Yep, representation and exposure. Y'all, the pandemic has been so hard on college access and, you know, making sure that students are getting the help that they need comprehensively, not just, you know, are you applying to college, but just are you mentally, physically, emotionally well? And that's something that we think about a lot. And we try to make sure that as we're reaching out to our students that first we're like, how are you doing? Are you well? Is your family well? Is there anything that you need? I love that. First gen students learn from other first gen students. Undocumented students feel they have no options. That is huge. My caseload is not very big, so I'm able to communicate with those parents and make them a priority and start early. Yep, sometimes it's easy to quickly prioritize. Christina, I think we would all agree that it's so hard to have enough time to work with first gen students at the level that they need. This is actually a conversation that we were having in preparation for today of just how there are just so many things that first generation students just don't know, and it's not their fault that they're the first ones in their family. There are lots of systemic things that are at play that make it so that they are the first ones in their families, and there's so much information, knowledge that you want them to have so that they can feel both comfortable and confident as they pursue their post-secondary option. There's so many questions, not just for them, but for their family, because you're really bringing the entire family on into that journey. And so I think we would all agree that we would want to have more time. Yes to sharing resources to provide stopgaps. Yes, like we don't have to do it all by ourselves. So who can we partner with? Who can we work together with to make sure that this happens? I love this. I love this conversation in the chat. I am going to move us forward so that we can make sure that we have time for questions and Q&A and reflections. But the other part, when we're thinking about equity and outcomes, is honoring choice. And so, you know, like, what is the role of student choice in your outcomes? And if you had to be honest about your program, would you say that it empowers student voice and choice towards their desires or to that which equals success for your program? So are all pathways celebrated, valued, and honored? And ultimately, you know, who holds the power? We recognize that the question of power can be tough, especially if you serve in a school where parents pay a lot of money for their students to attend. And we also believe that there's a way to successfully advocate for student voice and choice, even when parents literally hold the purse strings. And so building those relationships with students so that you can know them and confidently advocate for them from a place where parents also know that as you're advocating for their student, you're doing so from a place of care and there's not some other agenda at play is so critical. And I think Mr. Williams and I both, and Mr. Glover, we have stories of having to have had hard conversations with parents around like, we understand that this is what you want, and we've had several conversations with your child, and this is what they want. And so how do we meet in the middle so that ultimately your child is happy and successful and thriving. Those conversations never get easy. They don't ever get easier, but they are they're important to have because we do want our students to feel that they are empowered, that they have voice and choice, and that we're not just working towards our own individual outcomes or metrics for success, but that we're ultimately there for them to be successful. So as we prepare to close, we do have 2 final questions that we want you to consider as you think about your college counseling programs. And so this is the first. Does your program reduce or eliminate obstacles that students may face in their pursuit of post-secondary programming? You don't have to answer this, just something to think about. Does your program reduce or eliminate obstacles that students may face in their pursuit of post-secondary programming? Our belief is that our role is to eliminate barriers, not create additional ones. And I think sometimes with our systems and our structures, we don't recognize how we are actually being a part of the problem instead of reducing the problem. And finally, does your program honor student voice and choice, even at the expense of success? This is a hard one, and I think as Mr. Williams said, that was something that we really wrestled with. We've had a big wrestle here in Jacksonville where we've had to say, you know, a student chose perhaps a less selective institution because they had a higher sense of belonging. And that to us is important because we want our students to feel like they have a place on campus. And so it is amazing when students get invited to attend selective institutions, but not if it's at the expense of their mental and socio-emotional health. And so we have been able to say over and over again that this student felt that it was more important for their sense of belonging and that this is the choice that they made with all of the resources available to them, as opposed to us nudging or encouraging them towards another option just because it would make us as the adults look more successful. So if you don't feel that your program currently does these things, so if you don't feel that you all are eliminating barriers, if you don't feel that your program is honoring student voice and choice, even at the expense of success, what is one small change that you can make to move the needle? And we say one small change because it's important to note that every small step that we take in pursuit of equity for our students matters. And so I think a lot of times we think about restructuring everything, but there is one small thing that you could do. There is one, you could change a program, you could advocate for resources. One small thing that you can do, because every small step that we take in the pursuit of equity matters.
So that's all we have for you all today, but we do want to provide space for reflections and questions. As you think about your program and the work that you're doing, how are you feeling right now? What questions do you have for us? And I think, as Dr. Almond said, it's important for us, even as post-secondary counselors and advisors, that we are checking our own pulse through what we've experienced within the last year and what we're still experiencing, the social unrest, the pandemic. And if I know, like you guys are like us, even as professionals, we analyze our own educational path and how we've gotten to this point and how things are different now for our students than what they were when we were going through this same process, you know, graduating from high school, figuring out our post-secondary path and what we wanted to do for career. Things have changed. Where I'm not, I just wouldn't tell our age on this call, but we've seen such a significant difference even in the cost of education. And how do we advise our students to have the same opportunities that we want to be true for them, that were true for us? And so that's why we believe in this push for equity, and why we've advocated with our own region to make sure that we're providing the best opportunity for our students to choose their own path, and we support them along the way. One of the things me and Mr. Glover talked about this week, we came up with an analogy with our students we did a exercise with them, like time traveling. Think about where you want to be 5 or 10 years from now. And, you know, whatever that destination is going to be based upon the decisions you make now. And we wanted them to understand, like, hey, you know, if you take a trip out of town, sometimes we get travel agents because we want them to help us with all of the logistics and all the steps that are required: flights, cars, where we're gonna stay for that trip, what tourist events or attractions are we going to attend. And so we told our students, let us be your travel agent. We want to be your travel agent as you look at where you want to be 5 or 10 years from now. And our job is to try and help you successfully get to that destination, and not only just get there, but enjoy yourself and thrive while you're in that place. So thank you for those who are putting questions or thoughts in the chat.
This, I really appreciate this thought from Mike around the name of our schools with college prep. That's so good, right? Like the pressure for students. And so we've actually tried to shift it the other way around, like career, and like everyone is a career student. We all have to have a career. I mean, unless we plan to win the lottery. And if you do, you can absolutely send some my way. But like we are all of our students are career students, and we need to be able to prepare them for that. And what are the skills and knowledge and habits that they need for that, because that will be necessary whether they choose to attend college or not. And so that's a very valid point there, Mike, around like the name college prep and for students who don't feel like that fits them. Thank you, Ebony. Are there other reflections or questions? Okay. I see something. Still trying to parse out how to talk to students. Well, questions are coming too fast. Let's see. Deborah, I'm still trying to parse out how to talk to students about the very real discrepancies in returns of a college education. Especially. Yes. So, Deborah, I feel like you have been sitting in some of our meetings where it's like we know what the data says around the return, both financial and otherwise, for a college education. And so I think for us, one of the things that we have really tried to decide is like, so we can know and name that college is not for everyone, but who is making that decision? And ultimately, it should be the student who is making that decision from an informed place. And it's not because they don't have any other options, right? Like they're not defaulting out of college because they're not academically prepared. They are choosing a pathway that they have, that they've been encouraged to research. And so they know how they are going. And they, like they can articulate their why, as opposed to what I know happens in some places where, we've all been in schools where we have heard and we've seen, oh, like, he's not going to go to college. She's not going to go to college. She's not college material, based off of an interaction or an exchange that we've had with the student. And that's, honestly, that's just not fair. So I think communicating the truth about outcomes, as well as providing helpful, realistic data about the labor market, and making sure that they are aware of what their options are. Because for some students, it doesn't have to be a 4-year degree. I'm fascinated that there are some districts that are using matriculation into higher education, because that's unfortunately not the case here in Jacksonville, and probably one of our bigger frustrations that what is most celebrated is graduation rates, but that's another conversation for another time.
So thank you all we see a lot of great comments in the chat. And definitely, I would agree. We definitely need to prepare all students for career. That's the reality. The focus we need to really be thinking is career, and what path is the best way to get students to their career of choice. So thank you for all the comments in the chat. And so with the sake of time, I know we have only about another 5 minutes. So again, keep dropping questions or comments in the chat, but I also want to move to the last slide for our presentation so you guys can see. Here's our contact information if you want to stay connected with us, as well as our social media handles as well if you want to follow us. We also have our KIPP through college program here in Jacksonville, so we can actually share that information with you all as well if you want to follow us on Instagram and Facebook through our Facebook channels for our program as well. And so again, thank you all so much for your feedback. Thank you all for having patience with us with our technical difficulties. I think that is part of the world of Zoom. We thought we had it figured out, but you know, every day is a learning experience, right? So thank you all.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of your time at SECAC.
All right. Well, that was great. Sorry about the technical difficulties in the beginning. Didn't realize you guys were both in the same room.
No worries. Thank
Yeah,
you so much.
I was on the phone audio, Dan, and for whatever reason, when Ricky ran into his challenge, I didn't know if that was because of the way we were in the same space, so I just went ahead and moved to just make sure.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, that obviously helped out. So, okay. This has been recorded, so people can watch this later or listen to it later. And otherwise, I'm going to end the meeting then.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.